In September 1666, London burned for 5 days. 80,000 people lost their homes. A man confessed to starting the fire and was executed. Then it emerged he hadn't even been in the country. Someone else was blamed. Then someone else. And the truth, buried in royal archives for 350 years, may be darker than anyone wanted to admit. London, Sunday, the 2nd of September, 1666. It was just after midnight. The city was asleep. 80,000 people crowded into medieval streets so narrow that neighbors on opposite sides could shake hands from their upper windows. Timber buildings, thatched roofs, tar and pitch stored in riverside warehouses, a city built to burn. And in a small bakery on a street called Pudding Lane, something had gone wrong. A fire that should have been extinguished was not. Within an hour, the bakery was an inferno. Within a day, the fire had spread beyond anything London had ever seen. Within 5 days, 87 churches were gone. St. Paul's Cathedral was gone. 13,000 houses were gone. And London, the greatest city in the English-speaking world, was a smoking ruin. But the fire itself is not the dark part of this story. The dark part is what happened before it, what happened during it, and what the government did and covered up in the years that followed. This is the Great Fire of London, and the truth has been buried for 350 years. But to understand why the Great Fire of London was able to destroy one of the world's great cities in 5 days, you must first understand the London it found. Because it was not simply a city that burned, it was a city that had been set up to burn by decades of neglect, corruption, and willful blindness. London in 1666 was a city of extraordinary contrasts. It was the wealthiest city in the English-speaking world, the center of a growing empire, the seat of a restored monarchy. King Charles II had returned to his throne just 6 years earlier, in 1660, after the grim decade of the Puritan Commonwealth under Oliver Cromwell. London was celebrating. The theaters were open again. The taverns were full. The court of Charles II was one of the most extravagant in Europe. But outside the palace walls, London was a different place entirely. The medieval city, the City of London, inside the ancient Roman walls, was a warren. A labyrinth of streets so narrow that carts could barely pass. Buildings of timber and plaster, 5 and 6 stories tall, their upper floors jutting further and further over the street below. In some places, the upper floors of buildings on opposite sides of the street almost touched. The sun rarely reached the cobblestones below, and the streets themselves were filled with refuse, animal waste, human waste, the runoff from tanneries and slaughterhouses. The city had no sewage system worthy of the name, no organized fire service, no building regulations that anyone enforced, and no meaningful plan for what to do if the worst happened. The worst had been predicted. As early as 1661, the diarist John Evelyn had written a pamphlet about the appalling air quality of London. He had noted the timber buildings, the narrow streets, the complete absence of fire prevention. He had, effectively, predicted exactly what would happen 5 years later. Nobody had listened. And then, in the summer of 1666, London experienced the driest summer in memory. Month after month without significant rain. The timber buildings dried out, the streets baked hard, the Thames ran lower than usual, and on the night of the 1st of September, the temperature was still warm enough that many Londoners slept with their windows open. The city was a tinderbox. It needed only a spark, and in a bakery on Pudding Lane, the spark was found. Because what happened in that bakery, and who is responsible for what happened next, is far more contested than the history books suggest. And the man who was supposed to stop the fire from spreading made a decision in those first hours that historians believe condemned the city. Thomas Fariner was the royal baker. His bakery on Pudding Lane supplied hard-tack biscuits to the King's Navy. On the night of Saturday, the 1st of September 1666, he claims he checked his ovens before bed. He claims he extinguished the fire properly. He is almost certainly wrong. At approximately 1 o'clock in the morning on Sunday the 2nd of September, Farriner's maid woke to find the house full of smoke. The bakery below was already on fire. Farriner and his family, wife, daughter, and one servant, escaped through an upstairs window, climbing along the rooftop to a neighboring building. The maid refused to follow, too afraid to climb. She died in the bakery, becoming the first victim of the Great Fire of London. But the fire did not have to become the Great Fire. In those first hours, it was just another London house fire, serious but containable, if someone had acted. That someone was Sir Thomas Bloodworth, the Lord Mayor of London, a merchant, a man of limited imagination and considerable self-importance. At approximately 3 in the morning, Bloodworth was woken and brought to Pudding Lane. He looked at the fire, he considered the situation, and he said something that has echoed through history ever since. "Pish," he reportedly said. "A woman might piss it out." And he went back to bed. The firefighting technique of the era required pulling down buildings in the path of a fire, creating a fire break, an empty space that the fire could not cross. This required the Lord Mayor's authority. Bloodworth refused to give it. He did not want to be responsible for ordering the demolition of buildings that might not need to be demolished. He did not want the legal liability. He went back to sleep, and the fire found the riverside warehouses filled with coal, timber, oil, tallow, rope, and the wind from the east picked up, and London began to burn in earnest. Because what happened over the next 4 days was not simply a fire. It was the systematic destruction of a medieval city, and the response of the authorities, including the king himself, reveals something deeply uncomfortable about where the priorities of the powerful truly lay. By Sunday morning, it was clear that something catastrophic was happening. Samuel Pepys, the great diarist of the era, was woken early and went to see the fire. He watched from the Tower of London. What he saw alarmed him enough to go directly to the king. He found Charles II and his brother James, the Duke of York, at Whitehall. He told them what he had seen. The king immediately sent orders to Bloodworth. "Pull down the houses, create fire breaks, stop the fire now." Bloodworth finally began to act. Too late. By this point, the wind had transformed a serious house fire into something else entirely. The fire was moving faster than men could demolish buildings. The heat was so intense that houses were igniting not from direct contact with the flames, but from the radiant heat alone. Before a fire break could be created, the fire was already past it. By Sunday evening, the fire had consumed the riverside completely. Thames Street, packed with warehouses full of combustible goods, was a furnace. The heat was so extreme that the lead pipes beneath the streets were melting. Metal hinges on doors were turning red. Stone buildings, which Londoners had assumed were fireproof, were exploding as the heat caused them to crack and shatter. People fled, carrying what they could. The wealthy loaded their possessions onto carts. The poor carried what they could on their backs. The streets were choked with refugees, which made it impossible to bring firefighting equipment through. On Monday, the fire moved north, into the heart of the medieval city, Cannon Street, Cheapside, the Guildhall, the great commercial heart of London. By Monday night, the fire had reached Cheapside, and the flames were visible 30 miles away. People in villages across Essex and Kent looked at the sky to the west and watched London burn. Samuel Pepys went home and buried his wine and his Parmesan cheese in his garden to protect them from the flames. This tells you something about the situation. When a man's first instinct is to bury his cheese, things are very bad. And on Tuesday, the 3rd day, the fire reached something that Londoners had assumed was simply too large, too stone, too ancient to burn. And what happened to it shocked the entire Christian world. St. Paul's Cathedral had stood on Ludgate Hill for over 500 years, a vast Gothic structure. Stone, ancient, the spiritual heart of London. Londoners had fled there for safety, bringing their possessions, their books, their valuables. Assuming that a building of that size and solidity could not burn, they were wrong. The booksellers of Paternoster Row, the publishers and printers clustered around the cathedral, had moved their entire stock into the cathedral's crypt. Thousands of books, priceless manuscripts, irreplaceable documents. On Tuesday, the 4th of September, the fire reached the cathedral. The roof, which had been undergoing repair and was covered in wooden scaffolding, caught first. The scaffolding burned. The lead on the roof melted and poured down the walls in rivers of liquid metal, running into the streets, where it cooled into strange, twisted shapes that Londoners would find for weeks afterward. Then the fire reached the crypt. The thousands of books stored there ignited, and the crypt became a furnace. The heat cracked the ancient stones. And St. Paul's Cathedral, the most significant building in the city of London, collapsed. Eyewitnesses described the sound of it, a roar that was heard across the city, stones the size of houses falling into the street. The diarist John Evelyn approached the ruins the next day. He described walking on the still hot ground, on melted lead, on the pulverized remains of 1,000 years of history. He described the silence, the complete and absolute silence of a city that had been reduced to ash. And he described something else, something that had been in the crypt. Among the books, among the manuscripts, among the irreplaceable records of centuries, the coffins in the cathedral's burial vaults had been opened by the heat, and their contents were now visible, scattered in the ruins. London's dead, disturbed from their rest, by a fire that had destroyed everything above them, and then below. And throughout all of this, the burning, the fleeing, the destruction of St. Paul's, something else was happening in the streets of London, something darker than the fire itself. Because when people are terrified and have no explanation for what is happening to them, they find one. And the explanation they found in September 1666 led to something that should disturb us deeply. London in 1666 was not simply burning, it was also a city at war. England was in the middle of the Second Anglo-Dutch War, fighting the Dutch Republic for commercial supremacy, and there were French soldiers fighting alongside the Dutch. In the terrified, smoke-filled streets of London, rumors spread faster than the flames. The Dutch had started the fire, the French had started the fire, the Catholics had started the fire. Foreigners were arrested in the streets, beaten, their homes searched, in some cases, killed. A Dutch baker in the Strand had his bakery stormed by a mob, believing he had somehow started the fire that began in a different bakery on a different street 2 miles away. A Frenchman was attacked for carrying fireballs, which turned out to be tennis balls. The atmosphere in London during those 5 days was not simply one of disaster, it was one of panic, suspicion, and barely contained violence. And then came Robert Hubert, a French watchmaker, who walked into a London court and confessed. He had, he said, started the Great Fire of London. He was an agent of the Pope. He had thrown a fireball through a window of the bakery on Pudding Lane. He had done it deliberately, to destroy the Protestant city. His confession was enthusiastically received. He was tried, convicted, and hanged at Tyburn in October 1666, just weeks after the fire. There was only one problem. Robert Hubert had not been in England when the fire started. He had arrived in London 2 days after the fire began. This was known at his trial. The captain of the ship that brought him to England testified to it. It made no difference. London needed someone to blame. Robert Hubert was hanged anyway, for a crime he could not possibly have committed. The parliamentary investigation into the fire, completed in 1667, concluded that the fire had been started by the hand of God, not by any human agency, not by foreigners, not by Catholics. But London did not believe it. The monument built to commemorate the fire, completed in 1677, 11 years later, included an inscription on its base, blaming Catholics for starting the fire. That inscription remained on the monument until 1830, 163 years of officially sanctioned lies carved in stone for every visitor to read, and then quietly removed, because the truth that the fire had most likely been an accident was never going to satisfy a city that had lost everything. But there is a third theory about the Great Fire of London, one that the official investigations were specifically designed to prevent anyone from exploring, a theory that points not at foreign agents or Catholic conspirators, but at the king himself. In 1666, London was a medieval city. Its streets were too narrow for carts. Its buildings were too close together for safety. Its water supply was inadequate. Its sanitation was catastrophic. And after the Great Plague of 1665, which had killed roughly 15% of the city's population in a single year, it was also a city of disease and misery. The king knew London needed to be rebuilt. Several architects and planners, including the great Christopher Wren, had prepared plans for a new London: wider streets, stone buildings, proper sewers, a rational, modern city. The problem was that the land belonged to thousands of individual owners. Rebuilding would require compulsory purchase on a massive scale. Legal challenges, compensation, years of negotiation, unless the city were to burn down and require rebuilding from scratch. Professor Gloria Moss, in a paper that attracted significant academic attention, argued that the Great Fire of London may have been an inside job, that the fire was deliberately set, with the knowledge, if not the direct involvement, of the king, or of powerful figures within his court, who stood to benefit enormously from the rebuilding of London. The evidence is circumstantial, but it is not nothing. Charles II's response to the fire was unusually swift. Within days of the fire ending, plans for rebuilding were already being circulated. Christopher Wren's famous plan for a completely rebuilt London with wide boulevards and classical architecture was presented to the king within days, almost as if it had been prepared in advance. The king established a fire court, a special tribunal to resolve property disputes, with extraordinary speed. And the Rebuilding Act, passed by Parliament in 1667, gave the Crown unprecedented powers over London's reconstruction, powers that would never normally have been granted, except in the aftermath of total catastrophe. None of this proves the fire was deliberate. Most historians dismiss the inside job theory. But in the context of a government that had just executed an innocent man for starting the fire, and then carved lies about Catholics on a public monument, the question of what the authorities were really trying to hide does not seem entirely unreasonable. Because what London looked like in the days and weeks after the fire, what the survivors found when the smoke cleared, was something that no contemporary account fully prepared us for. And what the king did in the ruins tells us something important about the difference between power and leadership. When the fire finally burned itself out on Wednesday, the 5th of September, London was unrecognizable. 13,200 houses had been destroyed. 87 churches, St. Paul's Cathedral, the Royal Exchange, the Customs House, 44 livery halls, the Guildhall, 3 city gates, 4 bridges, most of the buildings of the medieval city, gone. An area of approximately 440 acres, roughly 1/3 of the entire city of London, reduced to ash and rubble. 80,000 people were homeless. It was autumn. The nights were getting colder, and there was nowhere to go. Tent cities sprang up in the fields outside the city. In Moorfields, in Islington, in Highgate, thousands of families with nothing, no home, no possessions, no food, and almost no help from the government. Charles II rode through the ruins. He was seen to weep. He spoke to the homeless in the fields. He distributed money from his own pocket. These were not the actions of a man who had arranged the fire, but they were also not enough. The official response to the disaster was chaotic, slow, and focused on rebuilding the commercial city, the city of money and trade, rather than the city of people. The booksellers of Paternoster Row, who'd lost everything in the cathedral crypt, received no compensation. The ordinary Londoners who had lost their homes received almost nothing. The wealthy merchants who had lost their warehouses and counting houses had legal mechanisms to recover. The poor had only the fields and the cold and the memory of a city that had burned while the Lord Mayor slept. And the king was at court, and nobody was quite in charge. This is what disasters reveal. Not the fire, but what comes after it, who is helped, and who is left in the cold. And yet, from the ruins of the medieval city came something extraordinary, something that changed London, and through London the world, in ways that would not become clear for generations. Because the Great Fire of London did not simply destroy a city, it created one. Christopher Wren was 34 years old when London burned. He was a mathematician, an astronomer, a scientist. He had only recently turned his considerable intellect to architecture, and what the Great Fire gave him was the greatest architectural commission in English history. A whole city to rebuild, from scratch. His grand plan, the wide boulevards, the classical piazzas, the rational geometry, was never fully implemented. The property owners of London were too numerous, their legal rights too entrenched, even in the aftermath of total catastrophe. But Wren got something almost as good. He was appointed surveyor of the king's works, and he designed 51 new churches, including the new St. Paul's Cathedral, which would take 35 years to build, and would become the most recognized building in the London skyline for 3 centuries. The new London that rose from the ashes was not the grand planned city of Wren's vision, but it was better than what had gone before. The new Rebuilding Act required that buildings be constructed of brick or stone, not timber. Streets were widened, the Thames Quay was cleared, and something else happened, something that had nothing to do with bricks or streets. The Great Fire of London created the modern insurance industry. Before 1666, there was no fire insurance. Nobody had thought it necessary. After 1666, it was obviously necessary. Within years of the fire, the first fire insurance companies in the world were established in London. And with them, the first organized fire brigades, private companies, protecting only the buildings they had insured, but organized, trained, equipped, the direct ancestors of the modern fire service. The Great Fire of London killed a medieval city, and in doing so, created the modern one. But the darkest legacy of the Great Fire is not the physical destruction. It is what it did to the people who survived it, and what it revealed about how governments respond to catastrophe when the truth is inconvenient. Robert Hubert was hanged in October 1666, an innocent man, for a crime he could not have committed, because London needed someone to blame, and a French Catholic watchmaker, foreign, Catholic, mentally unstable, was the perfect candidate. The parliamentary investigation concluded the fire was an act of God, but the monument to the fire, the great column built by Wren and Robert Hooke, completed in 1677, carried an inscription on its base blaming Catholics. It described the fire as being caused by the treachery and malice of the Popish faction. This inscription was not removed until 1830, 163 years after the fire. In those 163 years, how many English Catholics had suffered? How many had been discriminated against? How many careers had been damaged? How many lives diminished by a lie carved in stone on a public monument erected by the government? The death toll of the Great Fire is also contested. The official figure is remarkably low. 6 people. Just 6. In a fire that destroyed 13,000 houses and displaced 80,000 people. Some historians believe this figure is absurdly wrong, that hundreds, perhaps thousands, of the city's poorest residents, those with nowhere to run, those too old or too sick to flee, simply vanished, with no one to record their deaths, no official to note their absence, no grave, no memorial, no name. Absorbed into the statistics of a disaster that history preferred to describe as almost miraculous in its lethality. Because the alternative, acknowledging that hundreds of poor Londoners had been incinerated while the Lord Mayor slept and the King attended court, was inconvenient for everyone in power. The Great Fire of London did not just burn houses, it burned the truth, and the authorities rebuilt the lie, in stone, and left it standing for 163 years. The Great Fire of London burned for 5 days. It destroyed a medieval city. It killed an unknown number of people. It created an innocent scapegoat, carved lies on a public monument, and gave one of the world's greatest architects the commission of a lifetime. The new St. Paul's Cathedral stands today. Christopher Wren is buried in its crypt. His epitaph, carved in Latin on the floor above his tomb, reads, "Lector si monumentum requires circumspice." Reader, if you seek his monument, look around you. The monument to the fire still stands on Fish Street Hill, exactly as tall as Pudding Lane is long, 202 feet, a mathematical joke in stone, by the same Christopher Wren, who understood that disasters are not just events, they are opportunities for those with the imagination to see them, and the power to act on what they see. The question of who started the Great Fire of London has never been definitively answered. The question of who benefited from it is far less ambiguous. Subscribe to Veil of Europa. Every week we pull back the curtain on the history that the powerful preferred you didn't examine too closely. The burned, the buried, the carved in stone and left standing for 163 years. We'll see you in the shadows.